Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for our third edition of our Civics Spotlight webinar series. We are very excited to be joined today by Mr. Khalil Osiris.
Great to be here.
So much. Okay, so for those of you who may this be the first time you're attending one of our civics webinars, we are Citizens High School. We are an online, fully accredited high school accredited by the Middle States Association and DEAC, and we've recently launched a new Civic and Social Justice Academy, where our goal is really to inspire students to get involved. We believe that students have a voice in today's issues, and we really want to empower them and equip them with the skills necessary to be forces of positive change. With that being said, today's guest speaker is, like I said, Mr. Khalil Osiris. Sir, if you don't mind, I'd like to quickly read off a brief bio of yours, and then we can get into it if that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so Mr. Khalil Osiris is the founder of Reflecting Freedom Network, a nonprofit charity that provides free web-based accredited education for people impacted by incarceration. He has 30 years of experience developing restorative justice solutions used in communities and prisons in America and South Africa. His self-help program, Psychology of Incarceration, has been used in over 70 prisons across America. In 2011, Osiris moved to South Africa, where he worked as a consultant for schools, prisons, and companies that hire returning citizens. While there, he was selected to host a popular TV show, Each One Teach One, which won the 2016 South African Film and Television Award for Best Factual Educational Program. He is also the mastermind behind the groundbreaking documentary series, Truth and Reconciliation Conversations. The series features stories about individuals who are taking action to help change their communities for the better through candid, heartfelt conversations about bias, racism, and systemic failure. Wow, we are very lucky to have you here today, sir. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Okay, so I would kind of like to start back at the beginning. Would you mind maybe shedding some light on your personal journey and what inspired you to get involved in this line of work?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. One of the things I say from the beginning is that the word work really has a bad rap, particularly when you're young. The idea of work, I mean, it's used generally by our parents as something that's meant to be a kind of punishment in the future. Wait till you get old enough to have to work and suffer like we do, that
Right.
kind of thing. Or, if you have someone who just, you're fortunate to have a parent or parents who really love what they're doing. It's a very different word. The word work takes on a very different connotation. And so when I think about what got me involved in all of the things that I'm doing now, basically it comes out of partly out of my childhood, in that I grew up in an era where there was a lot of political turmoil like it is today. And during that time, there was what was called the Civil Rights Movement. And people were questioning whether or not they should go along with the status quo, whether or not it made sense to just keep going along with the injustices that were so common at that time. And so increasingly, people started organizing around issues of justice, social justice, racial justice. And it was in that climate, in that environment, that I began to think about what justice means and ask myself, what role did I have to play in it? Now, oftentimes we think those are questions that young people don't have, but I find it quite the opposite. I think that whatever environment you're in, there's a part of it that leads to us simply responding to our natural environment. And there's another level where if someone takes the time to really talk about us and have us be just a little bit reflective about our environment, a much deeper level of thinking starts to happen. And And what happened for me was I was exposed to the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And that experience was one in which I was challenged by youth or other youth organizers who looked at me and they asked the question, you know, you come here, you're obviously able to memorize the 10-point plan and platform. And because I was really good academically, I had great memorization. So some of the things that they were doing came very easy for me. And but the question that this one organizer had for me is, you know, I see you're really talented and all of that, but what are you doing to help your community? What are you doing to help anyone else other than yourself? And I remember, actually, it was a young lady organizer who was probably about 19 at the time, which was for me old. I was 13, so she was like, you know, almost grown,
Right.
you know. So, but she asked me this really deep question, and while I gave some kind of, you know, shallow answer at the time, she looked at me directly in my eyes, and I understood that she understood I wasn't answering the question. Mm. And that caused me to go back and really think about why I wasn't able to answer that question. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually my life had been very much a bubble, in the sense that I grew up in a pretty much a upper middle class neighborhood. We were one of three African American families. I was always at the top of my class academically. I was an athlete. You know, I was one of those kids that was you considered the most likely to succeed. Mm-hmm. And so being confronted with that kind of question, I had never really had to think about it. And so once I did, I realized that actually my life was kind of selfish, in a sense. And not that that wasn't okay up to that point, but I did realize that I wanted to know about something more. I was curious. And so in my case, the more I learned about what was wrong in society, the angrier I became. Mm. And I didn't have the emotional maturity to respond in a really healthy way to the information I was receiving. And as I became more and more angry as a teenager, that anger turned to delinquent behavior, less interest in school, a whole host of things that you never think about at the time that you're in your emotional state. Mm-hmm. And so I went from being this kind of all-American kid, if you will, to a very angry, delinquent, rebellious, more than anything, a teenager. And that rebelliousness led to some very reckless choices. And at 17, I committed a robbery. Now, for some people, it's a huge leap to go from being this all-American kid to someone who commits a robbery. And what I would say to someone who struggles with seeing how that leap could be made by a young person at 13 or 14 years old, I would just say to them that we're all aware of situations where if something really traumatic happens to us, it can change us. It can cause incredible psychological, emotional, and even physical trauma, repercussions. If a child was abused and verbally so for a period of time or anything like that, we all have this sensibility of how that can damage someone and how someone could be impacted in a way that's incredibly negative. Well, I would simply say that the same thing happens with our thinking.
Mm.
If you radically change the way that you think, it will be incredibly disruptive for everyone around you. And it will be disruptive for the lifestyle that you have developed up to that point. And so, what happened to me without my being aware of it is that in the midst of this idyllic environment that I was in, I developed radically different thinking.
Mm.
And that thinking led to really, really reckless behavior. So when I committed that robbery at 17, I was doing it because, like, this was the establishment in my mind, and I'm striking out against the establishment. I'm like trying to figure out in my immature way how I'm going to respond to injustice. What am I going to do about it? And while this may seem a really ridiculous way to respond, well, that's what recklessness is. That's what it means when you're reckless. You do some really, really dumb things. And at 17, and you're a young boy, a young man, you think you're a man.
Mm.
And in my case, going to prison and being in a maximum security prison, there's nothing in my life that could have prepared me for what I experienced in that environment. The level of predatory violence, the level of indifference, of savagery. I just had no idea that human beings actually could live this way. It's one thing to hear that someone has committed some heinous offense, and it's almost like they do something and it's bizarre, and then, nothing like that else happens, right? But imagine that this is prolonged. This bizarre predatory behavior is prolonged. That's what the environment was like. And so initially I was of the mind that I don't know how this is even human. And I was faced with making some really tough choices about how I would survive in that environment. And I discovered that I too could become a savage. And so I was stabbed by Aryan Brotherhood members, white supremacist group members. And I committed some horrific acts myself. Now, after 5 years, I was released from prison, maximum security prison. I was 22 years old. Mm. However bad a human being I was thought to be up to that point, by the time I served 5 years in prison and was released from maximum security prison, maximum security, where I had been stabbed and committed really horrific acts of violence, I was wounded. I was a wounded human being. I was an angry human being. I was a violent human being. And I had no intention of being a law-abiding citizen. I immediately went about creating an elaborate criminal scheme, which I hatched in prison while I was serving time in prison. And over the next 3 years, I committed this elaborate scheme, and then I was arrested at 25. And the judge looked at me and he said, young man, I've spent 2 days trying to figure out how to sentence you. Usually when boys like you come before our court, we know why they're here. Broken homes, poor education. They just didn't get a fair chance. Mm. You, on the other hand, you have an incredible family support. Your family's here. You obviously got a good education, and you have people who love you. And yet you're here today in this courtroom. You could have been here as a defense attorney or the prosecution representing the citizens of our great state. But today you're here as a criminal defendant. You chose to be here as a criminal defendant. And my only regret is that I cannot give you more time.
Wow.
And he sentenced me to 25 to 75 years, 15 to 75 years. I'm sorry, 15 to 75 years. At 25, that's a life sentence. I didn't know anyone 100 years old in prison, and I had been there. Mm-hmm. So, and you must understand, in terms of the court dynamics, the judge was white. He looked so, even his hair was white. I mean, he just looked so white. I'm thinking, this doesn't look good. This is not going to go well. But when he sentenced me, here's what I understood. Here's the moment of existential clarity that happened for me. I realized I wasn't going back to prison because I had been conscientized by the Black Panther Party for self-defense. I wasn't going back because I had made a mistake. I was on my way back to prison because of my choices. And I needed to come to terms with the fact that I had created this situation that I was now faced with. That however much we would like to talk about racism, systemic injustice, the brutality of inequality, poverty, all of those social ills that we attribute to how the criminal justice system works and how the unequal systems of justice conspire against those who are not white. Here's the critical thing that I had to come to terms with. All of that can be true, yet in my case, it was not the reason that I was going back to prison. And so it would have been criminal of me to hide behind all of those social ills that are patently used, stereotypically used as the excuse for the behavior that we see that's clearly wrong and unacceptable. And the reason I take such a strong position on this is because I was in prison with individuals who were actually innocent. I mean, who were innocent, did not do what they were in prison for. In fact, I went back to prison at 25, and I just decided that from that point forward, I was going to spend the rest of my life showing up in the best way that I could to be an authentic example of what justice could look like, of what a principled and a conscious human being could look like. What's possible for someone who decides that they're going to hold themselves accountable, that they're going to use their own compass of what's correct for good, for the good of others. And from that time forward, when I got to prison, there was a couple of things that became really clear to me in going. Number one, I realized that I had been incarcerated long before I was ever arrested. The source of my incarceration wasn't the arresting officer, the sentencing judge, or the prison. The source of my incarceration was the self-defeating thoughts, beliefs, the self-destructive choices that I had been making. they're what I call self-imposed limitations. We exist in a world where there are limitations everywhere. I concede that. There are limitations everywhere. There are boundaries all the time that we must navigate. That's the external world. I'm talking about the interior world. I'm talking about that part that we have absolute responsibility for being aware of and accountable for. Mm. And so that's a relationship that one has to cultivate with oneself. Excuses have no place in that kind of relationship because it's a relationship of absolute integrity. And so when one operates from a place from authentic integrity, you don't need excuses. You just don't need them.
Right.
And so going back to prison, I realized I need to do something different. I had the realization I was incarcerated before I was arrested. My epiphany was I could get out before I was released. Because the source of my incarceration was my own behavior, my own choices, my own thinking. And from there, I had to decide how I'm going to navigate prison now, understanding it with some clarity as to the nature of violence and all these other things happening. And I realized that this time around, my second incarceration, I had more choices than simply to respond violently to the violence. I had more options. And I needed to explore what those options looked like. Well, I went on to earn my bachelor's and master's degree from Boston University. I wrote the manuscript for my work you quoted, The Psychology of Incarceration. And the premise of the book is that prison is a metaphor for self-imposed limitations. And the majority of people who are in prison actually will never see the inside of a jail. We engage in socially sanctioned, self-imposed limitations. And most of them will not even raise the eyebrow of the people who we are in regular relationship with because they share the views. An example would be I could walk into a room, or you could walk into a room, and for no other reason than our gender or the color of our skin, someone could make a snap judgment about us. Someone could assume that you should go get the coffee and that I should tell them about what's going on with rap music. They can make assumptions like that. And guess what? No one's going to be quite uncomfortable, the least bit uncomfortable with that, because it's so normalized that we don't have to think about it. And the bottom line is that we make many, many assumptions based on really, really shaky information, bits and pieces of information. And I just realized I had been doing that most of my life. It's called compulsive responses to life. I realized I had been doing that. So I wanted to map out a different path. And that's what I began to do. So the psychology of incarceration helped me to really dig deep into the emotional and psychological, the internal aspects of what led to my incarceration. Because it was definitely about something more than simply the crime I committed. And it's that kind of self-reflection and self-work with an opportunity to really be tested in an environment where people really didn't give a damn about what work you were doing. They were wounded. And as far as they're concerned, your work doesn't matter. And so to navigate that, you either make a decision to intensify what it is that you know to be right for your journey, or you will be weakened by the conditions of your environment. I doubled down, tripled down. And ultimately, while I was there, I became pen pals with Makaziwi Mandela, who was attending the University of Massachusetts Amherst on a Fulbright scholarship while I was attending Boston University inside prison.
Yeah.
And so I decided I'm going to write her. Remember, my whole kind of journey comes out of this sense of what am I supposed to be doing?
Mm-hmm.
I had been waylaid by my own recklessness, and I'm slowly trying to kind of find my way to clarity. And as that's happening, I'm doing this work on who am I really? Mm-hmm. What am I really passionate about? What is it that excites my soul? What will I get up every day and be delighted to do if I never received a penny for doing it? What is that thing? I just at least needed to know it. Even if I wasn't going to do it, I at least needed to dig deep enough to find out if it even exists.
Right.
So in the process of that work, and on my radar came that she was attending UMass, University of Massachusetts Amherst. I said, I'm going to write her. And other prisoners, other guys in prison said, Osiris, do you think that woman is going to write you back? Are you insane? Do you know that you're Osiris? You walk around here like you're somebody special to us. But that woman is, do you know who she is? I said, yeah, I know exactly who she is. She's the daughter of a man who's in prison, who's been in prison for a number of years. That's who she is.
It's true.
I said, so let's just see what happens. I wrote her. She wrote back. We became pen pals. And in 1986, I made a commitment to her and Nelson Mandela, who was at Poolsmoor prison at the time, that once I was released from prison in America and successful, that I would move to South Africa and I would work in schools and prisons to honor the contribution that he made in my life and so many others like me at the bottom of life in America's prisons. That's how I would honor him. Mm-hmm. That was 1986. Nelson Mandela got out before me. Mm. So he served 27 years. He got out February 11th, 1990. I remember it. I was in my prison cell. I had never cried like that ever in the whole time I had been in prison, watching him leave that prison cell, that prison. And so 9 years later, I got out March 1st, 1999. I was 40 years old. I had served 20 years in prison. Mm-hmm. I can tell you not much was expected of me. And I'm not talking about by society and all those external kind of criteria or measuring points. I'm talking about I had some of my own family members who didn't have any confidence that much was going to come out of my life. By that time I'm 40. There wasn't a lot of people talking about, oh, he's just 40. Give me a second chance. Come on.
Right.
It's understandable if you're 20, maybe even 30, 35, 40. It's like, come on, dude, you need to, mm-hmm. you need to rethink some things. And so I was clear that I needed to be focused on what is necessary to turn my life around in society, in my community. And I had a very simple strategy, and that was find some place where they were doing work you're passionate about. Find somewhere they were doing work that you had some curiosity about, that you could learn as you did it, and that you would have an opportunity to be more fully human, more fully who you are. And so I didn't have any money. I didn't have any, like I had no 401k, no savings, any of that kind of stuff. I got out of prison, I had $75.
Wow.
And I would talk with people and they would say, no one's going to give you a job. You've been in prison and all the negatives. And I remember one day asking a guy, I said, now let's consider this as pie has 100%. Given what you know about me, everything, my past and everything, how much of the pie would you say is my opportunity to succeed? He said, you? I said, yeah. He said, 10%. I said, okay, 10%. I said, so I'm going to make that 10% my 100. I'm going to work that 10% like it's my 100. And so I went and found a place where they were doing work I believed in, and I volunteered. I went there and volunteered. It was the Urban League. And they had a program for family reunification where they were being funded to identify the fathers of children of women they were providing services for. So they provided services for women who had children, but whose fathers were missing in action.
Okay.
And the program was designed to start serving the women, but ultimately, what they wanted to find out, what they wanted to do was bring the father back into the picture as a way to reduce poverty for children. And so the problem they had is they could never get the fathers. They could never find the fathers. And the women wouldn't tell who the fathers were because in some cases they felt they'd lose their benefits. But this program was designed to make sure you didn't lose your benefits, but still there was a culture of distrust.
Right.
And so at the office I was working in, no one wanted to go in the community where the program was being funded. It was like this really, really high crime ridden neighborhood. And so I said, hey, I'd like to volunteer for that. And everybody's looking at me because I'm the volunteer sitting at the table, the new volunteer. And they say, well, okay. But we are trying to find fathers and everything. And the grant is going to run out this year. And if we don't find the fathers, we'll lose all that money. I said, I can find fathers. They looked at me like I was like really just the biggest jerk. I'm coming in here, opening my mouth. It's the first time I'm at the meeting and I'm saying I can find fathers. They've been doing it for 2 years.
Right.
Have not done it. And I said, okay. I said, well, I went down to the community and I'm thinking to myself, now I just got out of prison in real violence daily. And this neighborhood was a cakewalk for me. I mean, my context for this is not a problem. I know how to navigate this terrain. And so when I went there, I met the recipients, the grantee recipients, and I talked with them and everything. They told me, and the first question I asked them, how many of you have a family member that's in prison? Virtually every hand went up. How many of you have a spouse or the father of your child that's been to prison or anything? And virtually every hand went up. I said, okay. I said, and how many of you have been to prison? Many of the hands went up. So what I did is I developed a simple strategy. I went down to the probation and parole office and I started talking with all the guys down there. And I sold them on the idea of how they would have an opportunity to have job training and be able to apply for school through this program. Now, two of the preconditions of being on parole is that you have to either be working or going to school, taking some kind of training. So I already know I don't have to sell you on that. Yeah. If you're not working or in school, you got a problem already. It's just waiting to explode in your face. So the short of it is, I got so many fathers connected to their children that we won an award.
Wow.
So I was doing what I loved. I was doing something that came out of me really being curious about how I got there in that situation. What is it that I really needed to look at about myself that allowed me to become the kind of human being that landed in prison? In many respects, I felt that the individuals I was around in prison were there purely out of compulsive behavior. And I make this distinction between compulsive and conscious. You can grow up, live your life, and just respond to the daily circumstances of your life and never realize that that's what you're doing. Mm-hmm. In other words, you can go from childhood to being a teenager in your house, to the pathways to school, to struggling and finding a job, to getting a little small apartment, to a little tiny car, to all of those things. And that's just compulsive. You're just doing what everyone else does basically in your group. You don't have to think deeply about any of that.
It's like autopilot.
We're on automatic.
Mm-hmm.
The question, that's called compulsive behavior. Our emotions, this is why we say things like, when you ask people, why do you feel that way? I don't know, I just feel that way. That's just who I am. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, it's a little deeper than that. You are compulsively feeling that way. No, I'm not. Well, let's just examine it. But the point here is that I realized how much I was participating in that kind of unconsciousness, that kind of blind behavior. And what I realized also was the more conscious I became of what I really wanted to do and the contribution I really wanted to make, the more paths opened up for me to do that, the more opportunities appeared for me to do that. And so part of it is that the biggest part of it is that I started looking for it, that I became intentional. I became conscious, more conscious of how I thought, what I felt. Those very basic things, they may seem simple, but they can be highly disruptive. And let me just give you just a practical example, because we talk about this in terms of how activism happens and how you sustain it, because a lot of times you can get excited about an issue and in a few years it's gone off your radar and you're on to the next thing, or a few days. I'm talking about something deeper than that. I'm talking about something that has to do with you continuously examining who you are and what you value and how you show up around that. And so to do that kind of work means that you hold yourself accountable. You choose not to blame other human beings for how you experience life. And here's the most practical example. Everything that happens around us in our external environment, we will never be able to control that 100%. In fact, most of us can't even control it 5%. We think that everything is just happening to us. That's why we feel like victims. Victimhood has to do with things happening to you out of your control. That's what victimhood means. So the external world is never going to happen 100% in our control, and that's a given. The internal world, how we experience the world, that's totally in our realm of responsibility. And what I mean by that is, if you get angry at me, we can test your blood and see toxins rise in your blood as a result of your continued anger and ill feelings towards me. My lack of awareness of your ill feelings towards me, my toxins are fine. I'm not suffering. I'm not going to die from the poison that you drink.
Right.
So your ill feelings, the heart of your ill feelings is that it causes you to be unhappy. So you experience the unhappiness. And what has happened is that we internally are out of control. We are not in control at all. That's why it's difficult for us to sustain any joy. It's difficult. We get happy about something and a couple of days later, we're equally sad about it. No consistency. We get a new boyfriend or a new girlfriend, and we're so excited. Oh my God, everybody knows we're in love. And 3 months later, we're sitting in the bar with our drink, and we got the story. It's just ridiculous. The fluctuation, right? And we called, and here's the thing about it. That's so normal that all of us expect it.
Yeah.
It's so normalized that all of us expect, oh yeah, my friend, oh yeah, she just got, yeah, she just separated from the jerk. Yeah. Or all those kinds of ridiculous. When do we take responsibility? Because if you squander your power, if you squander your energy on things that really, really, really have no weight and cause you to be poisoned, you've got it all wrong. Mm-hmm. There's a better way. There's a healthier way. And that has to do with finding your joy, taking the time. Forget about work. Forget about your purpose. Forget about any kind of conclusions. Just take the time to ask yourself some very deep personal questions that you're willing to continue to ask and reflect on for the rest of your life. One of them is, how do I want to show up in my life? Mm-hmm. How do I want my life to be reflected through what I say, through what I do? And whatever that answer is, just know that whatever you say or whatever you do has its origin in how you think and how you feel. So what you say and what you do has its origin in how you think and how you feel. And when you see the connection, then you have to take responsibility, or at least the idea is that you will recognize you're able to take responsibility. Mm-hmm. And you're able to actually radically change how you show up in the world. So the activism and all those other kinds of things, you got to figure out how to show up first. Mm-hmm. You got to figure out who you choose to be. And that's not something that's static. The most practical example is that if you're angry and a person meets you while you're really, really angry, they're going to have one perception of you. If you're really, really, just over the top joyful and a person meets you, they're going to have another perception of you. Mm-hmm. Now, you can choose, I'm not talking about their perception. You can choose which one you are going to show up as. You can choose to show up as that really angry person because your anger is justified. That's why we show up angry, because our anger is justified. But then you still got to go back to the drawing board and realize that, I poisoned me that time. Yeah, I did it again. I know this and I still did it. That's the work.
Right. The self-awareness.
There's no, demystify it. You don't need a guru. Mm-hmm. You really don't. You don't need a master. You don't need any of those things. And I'm not saying they're not relevant. That's not relevant, because we all have mentors and teachers and leaders. It's people who nudge us and help us and all of that. Don't get stuck there. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm saying. Just don't get stuck there. It's a journey.
Right.
We share a journey. We have individual paths, but we share a journey. Mm-hmm. So while we're sharing the journey, there will be many kind of guides along the way. But the most important guide of all will be you. Mm-hmm. Because no matter what information you receive, you have to internalize it and make a decision about what you do with it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to internalize it and decide how you will experience it. So my years of imprisonment and all those kinds of things, for most people, we're so used to hearing the story of the wounded victim. That's just not my story.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize people who have suffered in that way. Man, I take responsibility for all of those things that I've done like that. And it's helped me immensely in shaping the kind of life that I have, what I do on a daily basis. And so I would say to a person who's a high school student or beyond, because the journey is lifelong, the fundamental question that each of us must continuously ask ourselves is not so much about what's happened to us, because stuff happens to all of us that's out of our control. But do you choose to be wounded by it or to become wise from it?
Mm.
I choose to aspire to wisdom. I want to see what pearls, what jewels, what treasures can be unearthed from this very difficult experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to do something spectacular with it. I don't want to walk around feeling like a victim. That's like the person who gets angry, drinks their own poison, and then waits for the other person to die.
Right.
It doesn't work. Life doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't work that way. That's why even when we talk about the issue of racial and social justice, if I believe that racism is pervasive and that it's being practiced against me, I must also have compassion for the people who are drinking poison every day. In other words, if I want to be healthy, if racism is being perpetrated against me and I want to be healthy,
Mm-hmm.
I must have a healthy response. Otherwise, I end up simply wounded.
Mm-hmm.
And that is when we talk about what is the vision, inspiration behind creating TRC documentary series, it is exactly that.
Right.
It is a recognition that we come to this work with shared responsibility for healing and reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And you can take your position from the label of victim, or you can take your position from the label of victimizer. How helpful is that? You've just got to ask yourself, how helpful is it? Do you want to stay a victim? Do you want to continue to see other people as your victimizer? I think we don't. I think that there's something in us that wants to burst beyond those kinds of boundaries. And the most simple, practical way that we can do that is through conversations.
Right.
So this documentary, the TRC documentary series, focuses on breaking down barriers through conversations about racism. And what we find in our work is we have 5 commitments that guide our work: compassionate empathy, courageous listening, painful conversations, social reckoning, and spiritual reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
Of those 5, the one that we have received the most information about people being uncomfortable with is the painful conversations.
And what do those look like exactly?
It, it looks like for many people, the most difficult conversation to have is within their own families.
Mm.
Think about that. The most difficult conversation, the people who report that painful conversations is the area that's most problematic for them, most challenging for them.
Mm-hmm.
When we ask, well, who is it who do you talk with? Who do you want to talk with? They said, my family members. I can't talk to my uncle about, I'm not able to have that conversation in my family. Now, that says a lot about the source of this woundedness, the source of these challenges. And so what we say is that first have the conversation by looking within and your own circumstance and your own circle. And ask yourself, how relevant is this conversation? Do I feel comfortable even having this kind of conversation with all of my family? Are there family members that I have who I absolutely know if I had this conversation with them, they would tell me they would call me all kinds of names that are ungodly.
Right.
Now, we all have family members like that. Family members who are not on the bus. They don't give a damn about your education, about your enlightenment, about your new views, about your psychedelic trips or any of those kinds of things. They're salt of the earth. They say what they say and they mean what they say. They're not mean people. They're not hateful people. But they can be people who have internalized racism and people who have internalized views of bias and prejudice against other human beings without even having to think about it. And so this documentary series shines a light on how we normalize this in ways that we're all complicitous in, quite frankly. All of us are complicitous in how the narrative of racism is told.
So why is it so important to engage in rather than avoid these difficult conversations?
The most important reason is because it leads to healthier relationships. And what I mean by that, some people will say, well, no, how can conflict lead to a better relationship? Well, here's the real challenge. I would frame it like this. Do you care about the issue? And if you do, ask yourself, what does that care look like in the context of how I interact with other people? What does that concern look like in terms of how I explore how to change when it's not existing, when it doesn't happen? How do I do that? How can I be in a safe space where I can at least try to test some of these things, ideas, and engage people? Listen, generally speaking, your family, however, I mean, they're going to be tough on you, but they're also going to be compassionate. And you at least have the comfort of knowing that no matter how harsh they may be today, tomorrow they're going to probably come back and have ice cream with you or give you a hug or say something that they hope you will take as kind.
Right.
That kind of network of support, of safe space, is very important when doing this kind of work. It's very important, especially when you're just starting out. So it's a great environment to learn in with your own family. Like it's like I always say that our home is our natural school and our parents are our natural teachers. So this happens organically. And so what we learn in that environment for most of us, shapes the rest of our lives. That said, the healthier you can make that environment, the more you can contribute to expanding on that environment's consciousness. Because it's not just about you and me, it's about the children who will come behind us.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how our family will grow. It's about how our family will deal with the challenge, what may be the challenge of our family growing in ways that we didn't expect, with relationships with other people we didn't expect,
Mm-hmm.
with marriages that we don't quite condone, all kinds of things that happen in the context of modern families.
Right.
And so these conversations are not conversations that you can simply throw away. They're everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're happening. And so there's no great treasure in avoiding it. This is the time to step in the water, to give yourself an opportunity to be challenged about your own views, your own thinking. Because one of the funny things about people who hate each other or dislike each other or have all kinds of reasons to justify their mistreatment of each other or of other people, the more you spend time talking with them about all the reasons that they dislike them, the shorter the list gets. And what I mean by that is, the reason why the list gets shorter and shorter is because if you talk with them long enough, they eventually see how many of those qualities they too have, or someone they love has those qualities.
Maybe projecting onto someone else.
Absolutely, 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 because we don't experience the world out there. We experience the world in here.
Right.
You can look out all you want. Looking out doesn't change the fact that you experience it inwardly. So you're only projecting what you're experiencing inwardly. That's all we do. That's why it's so important to decide how you experience what you're going through internally. It's very important, because if you're just compulsive, you will have all kind of foolishness going on inside you. You'll go just to a regular walk to the supermarket. Your mind will go 1,000 places in the supermarket. Go to Walmart and just pay attention to people in Walmart for 5 seconds. You'll be astounded. You just will be astounded. So the point is that it's work that we all have to do. The conversation is the part that's difficult for most people, but it's the most rewarding also, because when you get a breakthrough, it's like talking to someone who really gets you.
Right.
The friend that really, really, really gets you, like you can start a sentence and they can say something, and that kind of connection. I just have to say, of everything I have ever learned about that helps to change and improve another human being's life, I have not found anything to date more powerful than a personal relationship. Than to be present with another human being, to give them your full attention. And because whatever we give our attention to, we direct our energy toward. And when you give your attention, your full presence to another human being, that means you give them your full energy. And when you give any human being, anything, your full energy, something extraordinary always happens.
Mhm.
Always. You can give your dog your full attention and watch how your dog will behave. Your dog, that's what I'm saying. Your dog will know when you're not giving it your full attention. And
Right.
you will know because we develop all these little tricks for them. Like we'll just rub them quickly for 3 seconds and try to like push them off. They know that trick. They'll smash into us just when we do that. How does that happen? To give your full attention is a powerful thing. And to give it with genuine concern for the well-being of that human being, the other, that is to show up and be fully human. That's what it means. That we burst through the boundary of simply being the whole world being simply a projection of our worst.
Right.
We dare to see that something more is possible. And this is why it's so important when we say your purpose and all those other kinds of things, your line of work. It really comes down to the question of how do you want to use this energy we call life? Mm-hmm. Because you only have you have it in this form for a limited amount of time. Imagine that we're like a bubble and we're drifting. There's a point at which the bubble bursts. So as we make this journey, what energy do we want to give to the things that matter to us? Because that means that's where we're going to focus our attention, and those are the things that we're going to do. And if we show up, mm-hmm. This is something bigger than the thing you and I may think is the point of activism. This is us showing up and to be fully human and give our full attention to things that matter to us in life. And the TRC Global Summit, the Truth and Reconciliation Conversations Global Summit, is an effort to create a platform where we engage people in conversations that matter about what matters to them, that can help them grow, that can help us build better communities, better societies, and a better world, ultimately. And that's why I'm so excited about doing this collaboration and Citizens High School being the title sponsor, because we're now doing a global blog on Truth and Reconciliation Conversations 5 commitments. We're continuing the conversation globally. Mm-hmm. People are going to be able to earn high school or college credit. Absolutely. I mean, all of that is possible with this. So I hope that everyone attending this will take the time to register, join us for the TRC Global Summit, and take part in an amazing experience.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. And so everyone who's listening, just like Mr. Osiris said, we are very excited to be partnering together to offer the curriculum that they are providing for us in our new Truth and Reconciliation Conversation course. So the Global Summit is coming up, like Mr. Osiris said. Don't worry, we will be sending all of you information and links on how to join and how to get involved. But we are sure that you're going to feel very empowered and inspired by this. And so this course is an outlet for you to go ahead and continue the conversation further. It will equip you with the skills necessary to have these kinds of painful but necessary conversations with friends and family. And then we also want to turn it over to you all and see how you continue this work. We are going to allow you all to use things like TikTok, which I know is very exciting these days, and create your own blog, YouTube. It's your oyster, make it yours. But thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you so much, Mr. Osiris. I know you're a busy man. We really appreciate having you, and we look forward to the summit next week.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely night.